Okay. Let's bring up the text. Okay. Hey, Abby. So hold on. Let's bring up the text. We're just gonna go back a few lines from last week because it's connected. My computer is a bit slow this morning. Here we go. Megillah. Okay. Tonight we're learning in honor of Avi and Dina making the decision to make Aliyah this summer. Tzlach Rabba, Bruchim Abayim, Ito Bizmanai, in a safe, easy way. Okay, so we're holding over here in just a little on 6b, 6 Amid Bays. It says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, we learned this last week, but we had a machlekes. Basically, we brought down, we want to know who our Mishnah was like. Our Mishnah seems to be the opinion of that when you have two others, leap year, so the primary month is the second month, and the question is, at what extreme about if we don't know if they leaped it, let's say middle of Adar, what happens if we celebrated the first Purim? What do we have to do again in the second Purim? So we brought three opinions, and we came to the conclusion that Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, which kind of seems to say that the mamish, the primary month is the second month, and therefore the only thing, according to most opinions, would be that you wouldn't do in the first month, or how you would celebrate Purim in the first month, would be in the idea of non-fasting and not eulogizing. And there's some talk, and the Tosfos brings it down. Again, the Ramah brings down the halacha that you could be machmar is that you have to have a suda and simcha, and we finish off tov leiv mishta tamid. Now we have the two opinions of is basically, kind of getting down to the conclusion, what is the primary month of Adar? We have two others, 60 days, 2 months of 29 or 30 days. So what is the primary month? So Rabbi Yochanan says, Shnei mikra echad darshu. Both opinions of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer ben Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Eliezer ben Rabbi Yossi says that it's this first month is the most important, is the primary month, and according to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, the second month is the primary month. Have one verse in the Megillah to understand this from. So it says in the Megillah, V'chol shana v'shana, every year one should celebrate the holiday of Purim. Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Yossi V'chol shana v'shana, every year, meaning to say, Ma'akol shana v'shana Adar samach l'shvat. We always look at what was the month previous to the month of Adar, and that is the month of Shvat. So therefore, we always go with the month of Shvat, and it's after Shvat, which would be the first Adar, of course. And that's the main Adar. Again, according to some opinions, according to Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Rabbi Yossi, means that you can't, you're not Yotza if you do it in the second month. Just like according to the other opinions, you have to read the Megillah again. It's not good to read the Megillah in the second month. You have to read it in the first month. Hey, Shuki. Just doing Chazara. So he says, that's the reason the word called Shana V'Shana. Every year it's Shvat Adar. So even in a leap year, it's Shvat Adar. And the next Adar is the extra Adar, and we don't celebrate Purim. So too over here, we have to go every year with what's the typical. Reb Shimon Gamliel says, no, B'chol Shana V'Shana also every year. But you can look at it the other direction. Ma Kol Shana V'Shana Adar Samach Nisan. Avkan Adar Samach Nisan. Okay, so you can look at it either way. It says every year should be the same way. So it's the same way, meaning that we're going closer to the next month or to the previous month. Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Yossi says we go according to the previous month, Shvat Adar, and Rabbi Shimon Gamliel goes we go Adar Nisan. So you have two others. You have to go either according to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, you would go with the second Adar. Hey, Aaron. Okay, so we have a pasuk that could go either way. Therefore, if we have a pasuk that could go either way, we're doing Chazara. So then we have to go with Svara, logic. What would be the logical way to apply the pasuk? So the Gemara now says, let's understand the logic. His logic makes sense based on the rule of Eimavir al mitzvahs. If you have an opportunity to do a mitzvah, don't pass over. And as we're not going to do the Tosfos again, but as we discussed, the main idea of Ein Ma'avir al mitzvahs is, for instance, in the base of Mikdash itself, if you have an opportunity to light the menorah first or to do the table, if you have the men know that the way we put our tefillin bags into the tefillin bags should be the Shulchan Aruch brings down. We do it in a way that our hands should touch first the shalyad, the hand tefillin, because we put the hand tefillin on before the head tefillin. So why? Because if you touch the head tefillin, you're not allowed to be maver al mitzvahs. You just touch the head tefillin, and the head tefillin is on a higher level than the hand tefillin. So you can't just put the head tefillin on the side and put on the arm tefillin first. And we want you to put on the arm tefillin first because of how the mitzvah is set up. So it's a challenge. And what's the challenge? Ein ma'avir al mitzvahs. If a mitzvah comes to you, al tachmitzana. You can't hold it out. Now, the al tachmitzana means don't spoil it. Now, there's discussions in the Rishonim. Does this apply if there's a larger mitzvah, a small mitzvah? If a person says, ein ma'avir al mitzvahs, you can't pass a mitzvah. So the person could come and say, but the mitzvah that's in, let's say, not that we're judging minor or larger mitzvahs, but the other mitzvahs which are more, let's say, more crucial than other mitzvahs. Does that apply to in such a case where I want to do a more important mitzvah that could be recognized as a more important mitzvah? Now I'm being held back on a smaller mitzvah. There's the rule of ein ma'avir al mitzvahs applied. But in general, we had the question that we spoke last week at length. If in general this applies to other, because it only applies when you have a mitzvah in front of you. Here the question is, where's the mitzvah? We're not passing on a mitzvah. The question is the mitzvah now or later? So you're not passing. But that's another question. It's more zrizim magdimul mitzvahs, that you try to do mitzvah as early as possible. The difference would be with one of the Mepharshim say is that the difference would be that, let's say, zrizim magdimul mitzvahs, which means to try to do a mitzvah as fast as possible, would be, for instance, the idea that we do a bris in the morning right away. We don't wait until the afternoon. Why? Because like Avram baboker, Avram woke up early in the morning. God told him to take his son to Akedah. He did a mitzvah right away. He doesn't wait. He doesn't he doesn't sleep in. But that's why we'll do a bris in the morning if we can. So mitzvah. But if you can't, it doesn't stop the time. Whereas in the case, it's not just zrizim magdimul mitzvahs, because according to the opinion that it's on the 14th of the first month, once that date passes, you can't just read it on the 15th or 16th or 17th. So it's kind of like a mitzvah that's in front of you, that if you're not going to do it, you're going to be maver, you're going to pass it. All right. There's different opinions to try to figure out, but we discussed that at length last week. There's two rules of passing over a mitzvah or trying to do a mitzvah as early as possible. But the thinking of Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Yossi, that the Gemara tells us is that you have an opportunity to apply it to this month, don't pass over the mitzvah. And therefore apply it to this month and not to the next month. So that makes sense. So Gemara says, what's the reason of Reb Shimon ben Gamliel? And Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, my time, I've been doing this fast because we learned this last week. So Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, what's his reason? Yeah, we're going to skip the Tosfos. So Amar Rabbi Tavi explains, time Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel nismach ula l'geula adiv. That yes, see here we have a good example. He's not arguing that ein ma'avir al mitzvahs. He's not saying this doesn't qualify as ein ma'avir al mitzvahs. He's just saying that there's a stronger rule, and the stronger rule is to have the redemption of Purim next to the redemption of Pesach, and therefore there's an idea of putting geulas next to each other. Geula means redemption, so we want to put the redemption of Purim next to the redemption of Pesach, kind of to go into that flow, build up that momentum of redemption. If we do it in the first month, then we pause with the second month, we go to the third month, we're losing the momentum. So the momentum of geula, of redemption, overrides what could possibly be understood as ein ma'avir al mitzvahs, don't pass over the mitzvah, because you're not losing the mitzvah, you're just doing it. That's why it's not 100% ein ma'avir al mitzvahs, because here the question is if you're going to lose the mitzvah. All right. What are the two geulas? Rashi says the two geulas are Purim and Pesach, obviously. We want Purim to be next to Pesach. So therefore we have two logics. One is what should we focus on? That we don't pass over a mitzvah, and therefore we would go for the first month, or we want Pesach to be next to Purim to be next to Pesach. So I'm not sure we did this footnote. He says over here, some raise the question as this is no way relates to whether the sequence of four. Okay, no, that was yes about the four parshas. The question was the four parshas has what's it have to do with Purim and Pesach? It does have to do with Purim and Pesach because most of the parshas are connected to Pesach. Okay, now the Gemara does something interesting. The Gemara is as if we left this conversation here, we could just say, and this is pretty much where we left off last week, that there's a verse that says that we should try to do Purim every year in the same manner. And the question is, what does that mean in a leap year? Does it mean that we put it next to Shvat, and the reason is because we shouldn't pass over on the mitzvah? Or Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, yes, we have to do it every year, which is next to Pesach, because there's a reason it should be next to Pesach, because it's more important to have Purim and Pesach going together. They're literally a month apart, so it kind of goes in Geula to Geula, and then of course we have the parshas, the special readings that we have that after Pesach that starts with Para, getting us pure for Pesach, and then the Chodesh that tells us about the laws of Pesach. So it is a canon, and there's 30 days before the Chag. There's a lot of flow of holiday into holiday, and they're both about redemption. One is redemption in Galus, one's a redemption that took us out of Galus. This is a good flow in life that, you have first the Geula within Galus, and then from there we have the full Geula, which is Pesach. So there's a lot of reasons for drushes and Vartoras and darshaning and inspiration, why it would make sense and in concept itself to bring Pesach, Purim next to Pesach. Okay. But now the Gemara goes interesting and says, no, we need another, the Gemara wants to give another verse that would support Rabbi Shimon Gamliel to push it to the second month. Obviously, we're a little concerned with the concept of Emavir Mal Mitzvahs. At the end of the day, Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Yossi has a good point. There's a rule in Torah, nothing to do specifically with our case, that in Torah you can't just pass over a mitzvah. You have an opportunity to do Megillah now, do it now. So Rabbi Lazar as time in Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Mihacha, another reason of why he goes with Geula to Geula, because he has a second verse in the Megillah to support this idea. The Torah in the Megillah, again, most of the Megillah that we've quoted so far is from chapter 9, which deals with the post story of Purim, how Esther Mordechai kind of organized that this should be a holiday. So we're going to get into this parak a little bit more in a few minutes. So the pasuk actually says in Esther 9:29 to confirm the second letter of Purim. But the word second so indicates that there are circumstances when the Megillah is read a second time, which would be the case of a second month. Okay, so he's basically, 1 second, something, I hope I didn't freeze out over here. Okay, so we use the word second to mean Hashenis. Rashi says b'chaydish Hashenis, in the second month. So the second month gives us an indication. The word Shenis, even though it's not talking about the second month, it's talking about the second, but the word second gives us an indication of that it's talking about the second month, and that we would read it, if there's 2 months, we'd read it in the second month. Okay, let's turn the page. Okay, and the Gemara says we need both. We need Hashemis, this idea that it should be the second month versus the first month, which there is, again, it's not talking about that, but the word second, we could apply it to mean the second month every year. Like once we have the second month, let's just say the second month. Why do you have to say every year? So the Gemara is like this: if it just said every year, sahava miniki question, we have a question. Why? Because it could go either way. It could go either every year like Adar Nisan, or every year Shvat Adar, and we have the idea of a mavir al mitzvahs. You can't pass over a mitzvah. So there's still it's not so sure that we would go with that. So we see that mavir al mitzvahs is important. Hashenis, therefore it says the Kamashman Hashenis, therefore the pasuk says second to show that no, then in this case, we're not going to be so concerned with passing over on the mitzvah, because we're not doing the mitzvah, we're just doing it later. Because why? The Megillah is hinting to us, go with the second month. Why? Because you should have Pesach, Purim next to Pesach. So that then just say the word is Hashenis. Why do we have to have a Chol Shon Rishana? V'yashmin Hashenis, Havamina B'tchila B'risha and Ub'shein. Kamash V'lan Chol Shon Rishana. Because if it just said the word Hashenis, you'd think you have to read the Megillah twice. Once in the first month and once in the second month. Because it says to read it a second time. So it means a second. Again, the verse that we're talking about over here is talking that we're going to see again. This is talking about Esther sending letters about keeping the Megillah, this holiday of Purim and the Megillah to make it part of Jewish tradition. But at the same time, the word, you're kind of using the hint of the word second to teach us about that which you go with the second month. Because it has over here, the verse is like this. The main verse is like this. In 9:27, it says, Kimu v'kibla Yehudim aleim al-zarim al-kol nilvim aleim v'leyaver liyais oisim shnei yom me'ela kichsavim gzmanam. The Jewish people did, and they kept these 2 days, meaning the 14th and the 15th, depending on what kind of city, b'chol shan v'shan every year. And then we have in verse number 29, Vatichtov Esther Malka, the Queen Esther, the daughter of Avichal, and Mordechai wrote Kol HaToikuf, they wrote it all down into the Megillah. L'kayim as-igeres ha-Purim hazeh. The Jew wrote down the acts of power to confirm the second Purim letter. So we have a second Purim letter to kind of we're going to see that meant she wanted to make sure that they keep Purim. We have the word second Purim letter, even though it has nothing really to do with a leap year, but the word second means to go. Also, you could apply it to the concept of second. It's a hint. It's a remez. So now this is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. He sticks with his opinion that we have Purim next to Pesach because Geula to Geula. We have 2 verses to tell us that, and that's how we go forward. The Gemara continues. Rabbi Lezer and Rabbi Yossi. So now the question is that Rabbi Lezer, the son of Rabbi Yossi, why does the pasuk say? What does he do about the word shenis? Why does the Torah have to tell us? The Megillah have to tell us that Esther wrote a letter a second time. What's she talking about a second time? What is this letter? Why is this verse important at all? Again, to see the verses we have like this. We have the chapter 9 tells us about the holiday. So starting with verse 26, that the holiday is called Purim because of the draw and the kol divrei geras hazos. So because of all the words in this letter that he wrote, that you have to make it a holiday, and the Jews kept it, and then he wrote a second letter. Vatichtov Esther hapurim hazos shenis. She wrote a second letter. So what's the second letter? What are we talking about? So according to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, kind of telling us the idea of a second Purim should be in the second month. What's this have to do if you hold it Purim is in the first month? We need this verse for another reason. According to the opinion of Rav Shmuel, the son of Yehuda. The Amar Rav Shmuel by Yehuda. This Rav Shmuel by Yehuda said, "Betchila kavu b'Shushan." Initially, again, you have to remember, whatever the possibilities of it all was, the Jewish people. We're not talking about a long period of time, right? Nebuchadnezzar had 2 exiles of the Jewish people, right? Mordechai came in the first exile with Yechaniah, which was the third to last king, and then there was Tzidkiyahu. Tzidkiyahu was the final king that was exiled, and with the exile came the destruction of the first temple. So the question, of course, was, we have the prophecy from Jeremiah that the 70 years of exile. In that 70 years, there's a question, of course, the Jewish people always miscalculate when we start counting time. That's something that's been in our history. Mitzrayim, they miscalculated. The Bnei Ephraim, we learned in Sanhedrin, tried to run away early. But here also, we're talking about pretty much the end of the 70 years. The question is when it started. In this period of time, by this period of time, either because of the diaspora and exile, or just how things worked out, the Jewish people were spread out in the 127 nations under Achashverosh. They were all over the place, right? That's from Hodu at Kush. So the question is, they lived everywhere. How were they able to establish a new holiday out of the summer capital of Shushan? So Rabbi Shmuel Bar Yehuda says, "B'tchila kavu b'Shushan." Initially, they were only able to establish the holiday in the capital, in Shushan, where Mordechai and Esther were. And only afterwards they were able to establish it with the second letter that universally the Jewish people should accept the holiday of Purim. So Rashi tells us that's the second letter. Esther and Mordechai wrote a second letter that it wasn't enough that it's just going to be a local holiday for those people who lived in Shushan, right, where Haman was, where Achashverosh was, where let's say where they fought 2 extra days, right? They wrote the Megillah for everyone, and they gave 2 days. You celebrate on the 14th if you're in a walled city, if you're not in a walled city, So in the beginning, it was only able to establish in Shushan. They wrote a second letter, and he was now just not only the head of the Jewish people, Mordechai, but he was also the viceroy. He took over Haman's position, and Esther is the queen. And these were in 127 nations. He was a Moshe B'Kippah. Almost all the Jews lived under the rule of Achashverosh, and they sent out a second letter, kind of like Nehemiah, who was very forceful. This has to be a holiday for everyone. Rabbi Shmuel continues. Esther wanted this to be accepted by the rabbis. The rabbis should stamp, right? We think that, religious politics started, in the past 50 years. It's starting from Moshe Rabbeinu. So here Esther sends, it doesn't say why Esther versus Mordechai, but we see that Esther really was the one. Mordechai wrote it, but Esther was really the one that fought that this should be a holiday. So Esther sends to the Chachamim, Kiv'uni l'doros. It's not a one-time holiday. I want this to be established as a holiday forever. So literally, the arguments are mamish. Anything you would read on podcasts today. Why did he send her back? We're not so sure. Why? They're not comfortable, right? We're in Galus. We live amongst the nations. Let the story be. The Jewish people killed 75,000 people. They were saved. Just drop the story. Why do you have to stick it in the eyes of the Goyim? We live amongst the Goyim. You're going to be Kina. You're going to cause jealousy and hate, right? The Jewish people are so powerful. The same narrative that we have going on today. Do you want us to talk about how strong Israel is, or the Goyim don't like to see that? When Israel is strong, it makes them uncomfortable. The rabbi said, dial it down a bit. Take down the narrative. You don't have to make a whole holiday about how we beat Haman and got out of our problems. Just let it be. But she doesn't back down. She sends back to the rabbis. It's already in the books. They're talking about it already. This is not just about the Jewish books. It's already written in the books of Persia and the Medes and the Persians. It's already in the books of. This is a story that's already. It's bigger than just Eretz Yisrael and the Jewish people. This is already politics. This is already in Achashverosh's book also. Right? This became a bigger story, so you don't have to worry about. If you're worried about how it's going to affect the Goyim, the narrative's out already. So there's no reason that should be a reason that we should not make a holiday. The Rashash, of course, asked the question that based on the verses, it's not so simple because, again, like I said, the verse 25 says that they sent a letter the first time to everyone. They had a first letter. So what does it mean? What does it mean that it says over here, chapter again, it's verse 20. Sorry, Mordechai said Varmela. Mordechai inscribed the Yishtach Svarma called Yehudim. He wrote about it already. That they should keep the holiday. What's this second letter? It's mashman. The question was, seems like there's a lot of opinions, but the question was if the issue was that they didn't want to do it a second year, they didn't want to establish a second year, or they didn't accept it so strong. There's a question of what they, how far they wanted to make it into part of the Jewish tradition. So there's Rashi learns, like we're going to say, Rashi learns that the rabbi's issue was that Esther and Mordechai were going to cause kina. Kina means just let's just first see the Rashi, then we'll see the other Mefarshim. Shachalam b'shana sheniya, on the second year. So Rashi learns what happened. Rashi kind of answers the question. Mordechai wrote it on the first year. Okay, everyone's excited the first year, everyone celebrates, but now comes the second year. Shachalam b'shana sheniya l'kvarlam l'chayva, that should make an obligation, obligatory. It's a holiday. She says, what's the word kivu'uni? Kivu'uni means for me. Esther saying that's in the translation of the word is kivuni. How does Rabbi Steinsaltz say it? Doesn't give the Esther sent establish me for the future generations. She wanted to be that she should be on the story. That she has the Megillat Esther, and it's the Chag should be after Esther. So what did he answer her? Kinat me'eres aleinu. You're causing jealousy. Sheyamu ha'umois, that the nations are going to say, Sha'anu smechem lahaskim ha'falasan, that we celebrate when they fell. Right? The Jewish people beat the Goyim, the nations, that we're talking about Amalek, like the Alter Rebbe writes in the Kutei Torah that it was everyone that was all the 75,000 were Amalek. They weren't the nations themselves. They were actually descendants and relatives of Haman. But that's, again, don't confuse me with the facts. So the fact is that they looked at it as if you're celebrating, they're citizens of different countries also. They hold passports. So you're celebrating that the fall of the other nations. So she writes back, because Esther says, that's why she says kavuni. She was ahead of the rabbi. She knew that if they would talk about just the Jewish people, they would say, okay, the Jewish people, you're stabbing. He says, I want it for me. And for me, I'm already written. My story is already written in the books of Madas and Paras and Madai in by the Medes and the Persians. So V'sham Yiroi, anyways they're going to see. Mashi Irelam Madai Israel. It's already written that Queen Esther did what she did, and so therefore you're not saving anything by avoiding the holiday. You're just trying to downplay again the concerns and the whole thinking of this conversation hasn't changed. Literally, it hasn't changed in 2,500 years. This is the same conversations we're having today. The same ideas of how we're supposed to take Jewish pride, how we're supposed to take Jewish pride in victories. All the same. These are the same conversations. Esther had her view, and the rabbis had their view. So the Ein Yaakov says, not like Rashi, that on the contrary, because if you're going to make it a holiday, you're going to bring too much attention to the Jews, and it's going to cause intermarriage. Now you have to remember, the Rebbe quotes this verse many times, that Rabbi Ma'amim Misyadim, after the story of Purim, there was a tremendous conversion to Judaism. And why? Because the story caused it. Pachad, and everyone wanted to be part of the winning team. So there was a huge conversion, and it could be the Rabbi, then Yaakov says, was concerned about that more, that you're making the story too large, it could cause conversion, intermarriage, assimilation. So kind of let's stay low key and not make ourselves the winners. So Rabbi Steinsaltz says, although it is already stated that the Jews accepted upon themselves observance of the day of Purim, that was with regard to the fasting and rejoicing. That's the second answer. The first answer is that they accepted it the first year, they don't want to accept it the second year. That's what it seems from Rashi, right? So the Pnei Yeshua learns that the first verse was to accept it as a day of fasting and rejoicing. However, they did not want to record the entire story as of a miracle. They didn't want to put it into writing. It kind of seems a little bit more that's the Gemara's next conversation. This I don't know what this I'm not sure if this footnote's here or I'm missing something. I didn't see the Marsha. I checked the Marsha, doesn't say this. Basically, the Marsha and the Turi haven't explained based on Esther Rabbah that the essential question is, I'm not sure what essential question we're talking about. Why is Persia preceding Media in some verses and vice versa in the other verses? Okay. I just checked online quickly to get, I don't know if this is accurate, but according to Wikipedia, the Persians and the Medes were kind of very similar background people that made a union, but they had a similar language. It seems like at one point Cyrus the Great from Persia conquered the Medes, but it wasn't just conquering, it was kind of a union. It'd be like Again, not to get into politics, it'd be like, Canada joining America kind of thing. All right. Rav v'Rav Chanina v'Rav Yochanan, Rav v'Rav Chanina v'Rav Yochanan v'Rav Chaviva Masnu. Okay. A group of these four chevra learned like this. Yeah, okay. There's different concepts over here also. That's why the pasuk also says Divrei Shalom v'emes, that they were writing peace. That this was the idea of the Megillah wasn't to upset people, but is to recognize the miracle. All right. Rav Chanina, Rav Yochanan, and Rav Chaviva learned. Bekulu say the moed ki kol ki hay zuga chalufa Rav Yochanan uma'ayad Rav Yonasan. Side point: the Gemara tells us that whenever you see these four groups together in the Tractate of Moed, which deals with the laws of the holidays, just as a printer, it seems to be a mistake. It's not Rav Yochanan; it's Rav Yonasan. Okay, so Shavcha lahem Esther chachamim. These rabbis discussed a little further that Esther again writes to the rabbis. Now you have to remember, according to most opinions, that according to the end of Esther, there's a verse that says, that there was a certain Mordechai, although he was the head of the Jewish people in the story, seemed like the head of the Sanhedrin. He came with, he was part of the aristocrats, because the first exile that was with Yechaniah were the upper class Jewish people. He was the head of the Jewish people, obviously, from the story of Purim. He's running things. But he gets demoted after the story. It says, kind of people, like in every situation, they said, well, Mordechai is now a politician. I don't know if he should be the head of the Sanhedrin. So he was demoted, I think, a few steps down. I think we learn later, the Gemara, Mordechai kind of really went low-key after the story. He comes back with Nehemiah and Ezra. They took over they were the primary people in the rebuilding and the second Aliyah, that he came back to Eretz Yisrael to build the second temple. He's in the second temple. He has another name. Okay. So either way, although he's from the Benjamin, but he's part of the Chevra. Kisfuli L'Dairis. She says, Kisfuli L'Dairis. I want you to write, I want Megillah to be part of the Torah. Now, we know the Torah is broken up into Torah, Nevi'im, Ksuvim. The Torah is the 5 books of Moshe that was mamish, word from word, God spoke, Moshe wrote. We have the prophets. That's a lower level. It's called the prophets. It's written with prophecy. And then we have the Ksuvim, the writings, which is written with Ruach HaKodesh, divine spirit. And Esther wants to be included in this group. Now, why did he want to include her? Unless I'm missing something. There's definitely books that were included later. Daniel, maybe not, but Nehemiah and Ezra are definitely after the story of Purim. Okay, so Shavcha lahem Esther l'chachamim. The Esther wrote to the Chum, Kisfuni L'Doris. I want to be added in the Tanach. Again, you think they would give Esther, a rubber stamp on everything she wanted. She fought for everything. Shalchala, so they send her back. We have a verse that says questionable. There can only be, we'll see what this means. There can only be 3, there can't be 4. Now, some people learn that to mean that she wanted her own category, or they thought they could only give her own category. Torah, Nevi'im, Ksuvim in a fourth category. So it says there's a verse that says in Mishlei that says that says only that in Kehelis that says only 3, not 4. But maybe just be included in the writings. So that's basically, we'll see in a second. What's that mean? Rav Chanina, Rabbi Yochanan, Rav Chaviva, Masnu, Hodla, Minyan, Kaman. But the group is these 4 guys, and it's not Rabbi Yochanan, it's Rabbi Yonasan. Whenever you see these 4 chevra getting together to have a discussion, you have to chaluf Rabbi Yochanan and machnis Rabbi Yonasan, just to know that it's a mistake and it's not Rabbi Yochanan, it's Rabbi Yonasan. Okay, obviously there's more to this than meets the eye, but what that is, I'm not sure. The verse Shalishim v'leirvim, that 3 times, means to say that there's only 3 places we could talk about the destruction of Amalek. The story of Esther is the story of Amalek, right? The Sefer Ve'elu Shemos, which one of the 3 places? The story of Shemos is when Joshua fights Amalek at the end of Parshas B'Shalach. The Mishnah Torah, when Moshe talks about it again in Kiseitze, the end of Kiseitze again tells us the story of the laws of Amalek, and then the story of Samuel, Shmuel the prophet with Saul, that Saul goes and kills Agag or doesn't kill Agag. We read about that story in Zachar, right? Before King David, right? After Saul becomes king, Shmuel says it's time to deal with Amalek. So those are the three times. And this is the rabbis understood a verse from King Shlomo to say that 3, not 4, is referring to Amalek. You can only mention it 3 times, and if we tell your story, it's 4 times. And we can't tell it 4 times. Shlomo Melech was concerned about adding a 4th time, and therefore, sorry, we can't add in the 4th time. That's how Rashi understands it. Others want to learn that they thought to put it in another book. He says like this. He says, hold on a second. He says that some people think that you wanted to add a second book. Let's see what Rabbi Steinsaltz says. There is an allusion to this in the biblical text itself, as it was stated specifically with regard to the second letter of Purim, and the commandment of Esther confirmed that these matters of Purim, and it was written in the book. There is an interview after the first letter was dispatched, which included acceptance of the celebrity aspects of Purim. It was only that with the dispatch of the second letter that Esther was included as part of the canon. So Reb Shua Pinto says that the issue is that the reason he wrote the second letter, which gives us a little more understanding. The first letter was about the holiday. The second letter was about including it into the Chumash. So halay kasafti l'cha shalishim. The understanding here is according to its plain meaning. Even the wisdom of King Solomon, the wisest of men, warranted only 3 books in the Bible. Apparently then, although the scroll of Esther may deserve to be canonized, a 4th mention of Amalek should not be added in the canon. So says the Ritva. You can't add, Shlomo Melech only gets 3 books, so then why should Amalek get 4 mentions? The Pnei Yeshua writes, based on the Medrash, that the term 3 times in this verse refers to 3 sections of the Bible: Torah, prophets, and writings. Adding the scroll of Esther to the canon would be adding a 4th category. I'm not sure why, because Ezra and Nehemiah also were. Why couldn't you just fit it in, which is what we do? As its events took place later than the books of the Bible, therefore the sages sought as an allusion to indicate that Esther should be characterized as far as the writings, that it has to be part of the writings. He couldn't put it in as a 4th book, but they wanted to know if they can. Okay. But then, they found the pasuk that says like this. So first they thought that Shlomo Melech says 3 times, not 4 times, so we can't add in the book of Esther. Then they found another verse that says about the story of Amalek. It says Ksaiv, right? Zeis, this Zikaron as a memory b'sefer in the book. Ksaiv Zeis, Mashakasav of Kam Mishnah Torah. Ksaiv Zeis is referring to any time it's mentioned in the Torah. It's mentioned in the Torah twice. That's one Ksaiv Zeis. That's writing it here in the Torah. Zikaron is what it's written in the prophets, the Nevi'im. B'sefer Mashakasav Megillah is the Megillah. So we have a verse. They saw, okay, when Moshe Rabbeinu writes about Amalek, he says Ksaiv Zeis, meaning the Torah. The 2 times in the Torah, Zikaron would be the story of Samuel, and Sefer means in the book of Ksuvim, and that would be in the writings, and therefore we have a place, we found a spot for Esther, and therefore they accepted to write that the book of Esther should be accepted as one of the books. Zois Mashakasav Kam Mishnah Torah. Zois means anything here, which means the Torah. The Kol Mashakasav Torah Kair Ksav Echad. That's all means Ksav. Kasav Zois, that's one writing, is in the Torah. Okay, so basically, what the story of these 4 fellows, these 4 Rav Yochanan's Rav with the name of Yonasan, they basically tell us the story that there was a discussion. If the Megillah of Esther should be included in the writings. So they found a verse to say. First, they thought that maybe Shlomo Melech says 3, not 4. Again, the 3, not 4. Shlomo Melech, we have Kehelas, Mishlei, and Shir Hashirim of Shlomo Melech. So Shlomo Melech didn't want to allow. It's not 100%, to be honest, so clear what's the connection? I mean, Esther is her own story. Even if it's based on a Amalek, it's not really offending Shlomo Melech. So if you want to say it means that there's only 3 mentionings, there's a little bit of it's not so simple to connect the pasuk of Shlomo Melech's ideas of the 3 books of his 3 books, because there was a discussion if all his 3 books were accepted. So he kind of he didn't want to allow in another book. So he pre-wrote that there shouldn't be the book of Esther, but then he found a verse to support that he could put in the book of Esther, because Sefer Zikaron tells us that in the three sections of Torah, Nevi'im, and Ksuvim, there should be mention of Amalek. Torah is twice, Nevi'im is Samuel, and Ksuvim would be the book of Esther. Okay. So now, but it seems to be not so simple if how things are with Esther. How do we look at the book of Esther? So he says like this. Kitanoi, that this discussion is mentioned in a question by the rabbis of the Mishnah. It says Ksayv Zayis Mashikos of Khan. Anything said over here in meaning is Zikaron Mashikos Mishnah Torah. No, there's an opinion that says Ksav Zos Lizikaron. Ksav Zos is in Bishalach, when the actual war of Joshua and Amalek happened. Zikaron is how it talks about in the 5th book of the Torah, which is Devarim, which Moshe kind of reminds them of the story. It didn't happen there. Although we do fight with Amalek a second time, but they went on their disguise. They were in the name of Kanani. Basefer Mashikas B'Nevim. Basefer is referring to the story of Saul and Shmuel and the prophets. And therefore there's no space, there's no indication that we should ever mention the story of Amalek again. And we hear your argument and we hear what you want, but we have enough reason not to include the book of Esther. This is the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Lezer the Hamidoi says, Ksav Zos Mashakos of Khan of Mishnah Torah, like we said in our Gemara. That Ksav Zos doesn't mean Bishalach, it means Bishalach and Devarim. Everything in the 5 books is Ksav Zos. Zikaron is what it's written in the Nevi'im, Samuel and Saul. Sefer Mashikos Megillah. So there's a discussion, and there's a disagreement. Basically, according to Rabbi Yeshua, the book of Esther has no reason to be included in the Tanach. Rabbi Yehuda Mishmol, Esther Einim Tamas Yadayim. So now, based on this, Rabbi Yehuda, the son of Shmuel, it says in the Mishmol that Esther is not included in the laws of making one's hands impure. What are we talking about? So let's just see Rashi, and then we'll say it outside. The book of Esther doesn't make one's hands impure. Kishar Sfarim, like the other books of Torah, meaning to say Esther doesn't have the effect, it's not considered one of the books of Torah. The only B'tzias Shabbos, we say in the first chapter of Shabbos, the Mishnah over there, in Yitzias Shabbos, I think it's Daf Yud Gimel, says that there was a gathering between the house of Shammai and the house of Hillel. Those are the 2 primary houses that went on until Rabbi Gamliel. You have Hillel Hazaken, Hillel the elder, and his colleague was Shammai, and Hillel was the Nasi, and Shammai was the Av Bezdin, which is the head of the father of the Bezdin, but Hillel was the Nasi. The highest position in religious Jewry was Hillel, and that position kind of continued, that there would be the Nasi and the Av Bezdin. Av Bezdin would be like the head of the courts, but the Nasi is the prince of the Jewish people. Hillel and Shammai. From there split off two houses, the house of Shammai and the house of Hillel. The house of Shammai were more strict. The rule is that whenever there's an argument between Hillel and Shammai, we go with Hillel. The law is according to Hillel. Mashiach comes is going to be according to Shammai. And many questions that we have in our life that we don't even know. Let's say, how do we light the menorah? The first night 1 candle, the second night or 2 candles, or the first night 8 candles, the second night 7 candles is an argument. We go according to the house of Hillel, so we start with 1, 2. But Shammai says no, go 8, 7. And there's many arguments of house of Hillel and house of Shammai. But what was the reason? One of the main reasons is because Hillel had a majority. There was a time that there was a gathering one night in someone's loft, and when we counted the numbers, Shammai had the superior numbers, and he quickly passed a whole bunch of laws according to the house of Shammai. One of the laws that he passed was that if you touch a sefer of Torah, your hands come impure. Why did they say that, the house of Shammai? So one of the main reasons was because the people thought that they would hide the truma, the tithing, which has to stay pure, with the svarim. Because they thought, wish I put my tithings. I'll put it by the Sefer Torah. Keep it holy, two things holy. But what they were causing was rats and bugs to come, and they would nibble at the food and then eat the books and cause damage to the books. So they said, you know what? If you're going to put the books are going to make the truma tameh. You're not allowed to make truma tameh. It's forbidden to turn truma to make it tameh. So that prevents people from putting the food by the truma. That's the main reason why they did it. But it has to be a book of Torah. But the fact that Shmuel says Esther doesn't make your hands impure means Esther is not a book of Torah. So any time Sidam, Kishar's family, you see Shabbos, Shagazur name that the rabbi said that if you touch a Sefer Torah, your hands become impure. Again, the whole idea of the hands and the washing of the hands, that's kind of Shlomo Melech was into that because he wanted people's hands are always all around the place. He wanted people to keep their hands pure. That's why, of course, we know Jewish people are always washing our hands. So that's to purify our hands. So the hands, he wanted people to keep, if they're going to touch the Torah, the hands are going to come impure, then they can't touch the Truma. So that would keep the food away from the books. So Shagazran Tami Sedam Truma Machlekes B'Shamei Sil. So Rabbi Steinsaltz explains, the sages issued a decree that sacred scrolls shall render hands impure according hands that come into contact with sacred scrolls, second degree ritual impurity status. It's Tamei it's Tamei Shniya. It's the second level. This decree was issued to encourage greater regard for these scrolls by discouraging casual contact with them, as well as to discourage the practice of storing truma, tithing, with these scrolls, attracting vermin which gnawed, and ruined the books. The animals came and they ruined this farm. The second degree impurity would disqualify the truma and render its consumption prohibited. The sages said in the Mishnah, Yadayim, the greater the significance of an item, the greater its impurity. So the hands can make truma impure. There's different things. A shniya can make the truma impure. If it's kodesh, it's different. If it's chulin, so basically the truma would become impure. If the truma became impure, so then you can't eat it. So therefore, the people wouldn't put the food there. So it was a kind of a method that people should keep the food away from the books. The food meaning the truma. So what does it mean? The name of the Savar Shmuel, for Rabbi Yehuda, the name of Shmuel, who's it? Rabbi Yehuda? And Rabbi Yehuda, the name of Shmuel, that Esther Ruach Kodeshim. What he's saying, it's not one of the books. So he doesn't really get into the argument of that it's disqualified because of the verses. He's saying it's Pashut, it's not a book that was written with the divine spirit. Because if it was written with the divine spirit, it would be holy enough to make the hands impure. Shmuel, Shmuel himself says, Esther Ruach HaKodesh Nemra. Esther was said with the divine spirit. The story was told with the Ruach HaKodesh, but the writing of it wasn't written in the way of Ruach HaKodesh. So basically, according to Shmuel, it's based on what Shmuel says that it doesn't make the hands impure, which is also according to Rabbi Yeshua. The question is based on that. The question is, what about reading it by heart? You're not allowed to read. It said we can learn later in the Mishnah that reading Megillah by heart disqualifies the. It's not considered reading, but if it's not part of the Torah, why can you read it by heart according to Shmuel and Rabbi Yeshua? So it says that this opinion is according to Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua doesn't agree with that Mishnah. Okay. So Shmuel asked himself says that he said, let's see, is there Rashi on this? No. So the Tosfos says like this. She said it with the divine spirit in the story, but not the writing of the story. Mashma, from this we learned, if it's not written according to Ruach HaKodesh, then it's not considered Kisvei Kodesh, it's not considered Torah Shebeksav. So the prohibition of reading Torah Shebeksav by heart, we know you're not allowed to read Torah Shebeksav by heart, aside from Hazinu. So why can't you read the Megillah by heart if someone knows it by heart? Because we have a Mishnah that doesn't seem to be that anyone argues. In page 17, the Tani Krab Pelayotza, if you read the Megillah by heart, you're not Yotza, you're not considered fulfilling your obligation of reading the Megillah. So if according to Rav Shmuel, it says it's the writing of it is not with Ruach HaKodesh, why do you have to read it inside? Also, how we write it has to be written like a Sefer Torah with this proper scrolls, proper parchment, and the sewing has to be with the proper arteries that they use for holy scriptures. Rabbi Yochanan also, Rabbi Yochanan says that if it's read like in a Chumash style, it's also not kosher. We see again, there's many of opinions that say that the Megillah is holy. So what's this mean? The Hadaka Amalai Niter Lichta Baruch HaKodesh Aval Midrabanan Niter Lichta Velikreis. The Farish, the Hadaka Amalai Niter Lichta Baruch HaKodesh Aval Midrabanan Niter Lichta. That it says that it wasn't biblically, so to say, but the rabbi said you should write it. And the rabbi said you should write it, so you shouldn't read it by heart. For Nikreis, Vakati Kashya, the Amun and Perkam Mani Masach Yuma, Nimshala Esther, Elas Shachar, Ma Shachar Seif Alayla, Af Esther Seif Hanisim. We find another place in the Yuma it says that Esther was the end of Esther. Esther is like the morning, it comes after the night. That the Esther was the end of the night. Esther is the end of the miracles, but she's part of the miracles. So the Gemara says, what do you mean? How could you? The Gemara and Yuma asked the question that it says that Esther is the end of miracles. So what do you mean it's the end of miracles? Everyone knows the story of Hanukkah happens after the story of Purim. So what about the story of Hanukkah? That's a miracle. This is no. The story of Hanukkah isn't. It's not part of the writings. It's not part of the Torah. But Esther is part of the Torah. So what do we see? That Esther is considered part of the Torah. And what do you want to tell me? It's only rabbinic. You can't say that it's only the rabbis said you could add it. That's called writing. There's also a rabbinic version of the Chanukah, right? It's called Megillat Chashmonayim, Megillat Tainus. So the rabbis do have some sort of rabbinic story of Hanukkah that's written, but it's not the Megillah. So you can't say that Hanukkah is like the Megillah. So we see clearly that, according to most opinions, the Megillah is sacred. It's not just the rabbi said you could write it. The Ksiva the Megillah Mahani Tafi. That's Richa Gidin V'Shirtut, the common dvarim Dleitzich Megillah Steinsaltz. He says they're both rabbinic, but the rabbis were more strict with how you write the Megillah of Esther than the other Megillahs of Tainus. Other stories of miracles, like the story of Hanukkah, doesn't have any restrictions of what kind of parchment it's written on, and the sewings of the arteries. The rabbis made it almost like midaraisa, but you could still say it's rabbinic. Okay, that's what Rabbi Steinsaltz has to say about all this. The question is raised. From many of these sources, proof may be adduced that Mordechai was inspired by divine spirit. We find, like later we're going to talk about, Mordechai had Ruach HaKodesh when he wrote it. So how can you say it wasn't written with Ruach HaKodesh? As he was privy to matters that cannot have been otherwise known. He writes about things that only if he had divine spirit he was able to write about them. And we're going to learn about them in the Gemara. However, these sources do not prove that the entire book of Esther was divinely inspired. Okay, basically, what the Yarach Dvash is saying, that to have moments of Ruach HaKodesh is not like the entire thing being written in Ruach HaKodesh. Some answer that it would have been inappropriate to publicize the divine spirit in the book of Esther had the book itself not been divinely inspired. Okay. So if it wasn't some answer that it would have not been some answer that it would have been inappropriate to publicize the divine spirit in the book of Esther had the book of itself not been divinely inspired. Okay, so therefore the question is if it was divinely inspired or not. In general, I'm not sure if this is a Hayom Yom or just an idea. It's brought down. I can't remember if it's a Yom Yom. It's definitely brought down that there's a Chassid. I think it was Rabbi Isaac Kamler said once that Ruach HaKodesh has different levels. He was talking about the Alter Rebbe, the Middle Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek. He said not every tzaddik has the same level of the divine spirit. Some have the divine spirit constantly. Some have it every once in a while. Some have it at certain times. And he gives 3 different levels. And that's kind of what we're saying over here in the first answer, that Mordechai had some inspiration of divine, but doesn't mean that the whole thing was written with divine spirit. The book of the Bibles are divided into three categories. Torah written by Moshe, who enjoyed a direct relationship with God, i.e. God spoke, Moshe wrote. So much so that Rashi asks, how do we have the end version of the story of Moshe, right? Moshe, at the end it says Moshe died and he passed away, and there's a few verses at the end of the Torah that talk about Moshe post-death. So how could you say Moshe, God spoke and Moshe wrote? Who wrote that? So there's different opinions. One opinion is God spoke, Moshe wrote about his future. He says, Rashi says he wrote and he cried, but he wrote. Right? God spoke, Moshe wrote. That's the first 5 books of Moses. Prophets, written by the prophets with prophetic insight. So they spoke with Nevi'im. That's a different level. It's not like God speaking, Moshe writing. And the writings which were written with divine inspiration, that's Ruach HaKodesh. So we have God speaking, Moshe writing, we have the prophecies, and we have Ruach HaKodesh. The lighter quality, which is the level below prophecy, distinguishes the books of the writings from the other books of wisdom, such as the book of Ben Sira. Ben Sira, which is you have to check on what Ben Sira was. It's also a book that kind of almost tried to muscle itself into the Torah, which it did not, which are not included in the biblical canon. So Ben Sira, we quote Ben. I think we learned about this in Sanhedrin, that he wanted to bury the book of Ben Sira. For those who remember correctly, I think Shuki jumped off, but I think we learned about that once. Okay, let's just do one more small piece over here. Meisvei, we ask a question. The book of Kehelis from Shlomo Melech also doesn't make the hands impure, i.e., it's not considered as holy as the books of the Torah. We're not sure about Shir Shirim, Song of Songs. Again, we know that there's a whole machlekes. Rabbi Akiva says Shir Shirim is Kodesh Kodashim, is holy of holies. But according to, there's an argument, we're not sure about Shir Shirim. Rabbi Yossi Amar Shir Shirim Tamas Yadayim. And machlekes bekehelis. He says that Shir Shirim does make the hands impure, but there's a question about kehelis. Kehelis itself is not, we're not sure. Rabbi Shimon Omer kehelis mikulei beishami mechum beisil. And Rabbi Shimon says that kehelis is depending on who you're asking. Rabbi Shami says it's not. Beisil says it is. Avlerus v'shir shirim v'ester mitamas yadayim. So here we see clearly that the opinion is, the Mishnah says that everyone agrees Esther it does make the hands impure. So no one's arguing about Esther. So he answers that this is opinion that the Rav, the name of Shmuel, that says it doesn't make the hands impure. It's going to Rabbi Yeshua, says it doesn't make the hands impure because it wasn't written with divine inspiration. Let's just finish off this Rashi. Who the Amuk Rabbi Yeshua the Amaliyah Zais Masha Kasev v'Torah Zichrei Masha Kasev Mishnah Torah v'Sefer Masha Kasev v'Nevim Av Megillah Nitn Lichtav Legursa Al Peh v'Lekreisa. So again, the opinion of Shmuel that says that doesn't make the hands impure because Rabbi Yeshua says we have a verse that says Zais is talking about Ksev Zais is talking about B'Shalach, and Kasev is what it's talking about in Zikaron is what it's talking about in Mishnah Torah, and Sefer is the story of Samuel, and therefore Rabbi Yeshua says there's a clear indication that we should not include Esther, and therefore it was written, but it shouldn't be. It can be read, but it can't be written. It's not part of the Torah. Okay, so we have different opinions. We finish off. We're going to circle back to this at the beginning of next week about Kehelis, Shir Shirim, and why the rabbis would have thought that Kehelis, these are the different books that were written by Proverbs, Holy of Holies, if it was written with divine spirit, if Shlomo Melch's books were written. There's a Gemara in Shabbos talks about they wanted to bury some of Shlomo Melch's books. So at the end, of course, we have Kehelis, Mishlei, and Shir Shirim that are all part of the Torah. But this was a discussion. It wasn't, everything's not so simple. All right, thank you again, and thank you again, Mazel Tov, Din and Avi, on the decision to make Aliyah. I look forward to seeing you here, Yerushalayim Kodesh, even before with Mashiach Tzidkenu. Laila Tov, thank you very much, everyone, for joining.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Yes.